we can jump in to the things. So yesterday with us, I will introduce him in a few seconds, and also just announcements for next week, and then last week of May, also coming up Gil Raviv and Imke. So quite an interesting end of April and May in our user group. So if you have time, interest, join for upcoming sessions also coming in. But today, as we have our guests, Nikola, probably better known as Data Mozart for his blog, and he'll take us today through the query folding in Power BI. So I think, Nikola, you said this is actually the first session after the Power BI Summit last week. So this is quite a new session. So welcome and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Augustin. Yeah, you are right. This is the premiere for audience. Yeah, Power BI Summit was paid conference, so I guess that a lot of people couldn't maybe afford or whatever. So this is the first time I present after that. So I hope that you will enjoy the session. Should I start or?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
You can start.
Okay.
I started the recording, so people will jump in. I will just admit the entrance.
Perfect. So hi everybody, good afternoon from my side. And first of all, I would like to thank Augustin for inviting me to present for Power Platform User Group Stuttgart. And I'm really happy to be with you here. Today, I want to talk about one of the most underrated but very important features in Power BI, or to be more specific, Power Query Engine. And that feature is query folding. Will that break a query folding? Does your query fold? Maybe someone asked you those questions, but you're like, query what? Or maybe you've heard about query folding, but didn't know how to take advantage of it in real life scenarios. So if you recognize yourself in at least one of these two situations, which I mentioned, then this session is for you. We will learn what is query folding, in which scenarios Power BI will apply it, and how you as a Power BI developer can benefit from understanding this concept. Okay, so before we start, just let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Nikola Ilic. I'm originally from Belgrade in Serbia, but since last almost 5 years, I live in a wonderful city of Salzburg in Austria, where I work as a business intelligence developer at company ITSP Services. Living in Salzburg was the reason why I've chosen my nickname Data Mozart. I guess you all know that Salzburg is worldly famous as a birthplace of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I was brave enough to use his last name as part of my nickname. And that's why my motto is make music from your data. You can find me on the web. I'm regularly blogging at data-mozart.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter. So feel free to ping me or connect if you like. A few more sentences about me. Multiple year experience working with different data products, predominantly Microsoft Data Platform. Started with SQL Server, then brushed myself with analysis services, multidimensional reporting services, integration services, and most recently, if you consider last, let's say almost 4 years, as recent with Power BI. I'm also Microsoft certified trainer, and privately, I'm father of 2 kids and true football and Barca fan, as you can conclude if you look at the photo on your screen. Let me briefly walk you through the contents of our session today. We will kick it off talking about data shaping as one of the most important concepts in data preparation process in order to put our discussion in the proper context. Next, I will spend a few minutes describing Power Query as it is environment where query folding residing or not. Then we will focus on explaining what is query folding and why should you understand this feature in a proper way. After that, you will see why people say that the devil is in the detail. I will show you a few tips and tricks related to query folding and how to avoid possible pitfalls. Of course, there will be a few demos along the way, and we will wrap it up with recommendations how to proceed further from this session and deepen your knowledge regarding query folding. Story about data shaping starts in unusual way. I guess you all know the book written by Thomas More called Utopia. In that story, everything is perfect and everyone is satisfied. In an ideal world, let's call it data utopia for our purpose. We have clean, high quality data that just comes into our reports as it is without needing to perform any kind of facelifting or transformations along the way. Unfortunately, data utopia can exist only in books. Reality, of course, is more cruel as we have to deal with a whole bunch of challenges while nurturing our data. And that being said, one of the key concepts that we have to absorb is data shaping. Data shaping is the process you should perform once you get familiar with your data and become aware of possible pitfalls within the data you're planning to use in your business intelligence solution. I've intentionally used the term business intelligence instead of Power BI, as this is a general concept that should be used outside of Power BI solutions too. In most simple words, data shaping is the process of data consolidation before it becomes part of your data model. The key thing to keep in mind here is the word before. So one would perform data shaping before the data goes into the report itself. Data shaping can be done at different places, and depending on where you apply data shaping techniques at different points in time during the data preparation process. So where should you perform data shaping? Source database. This is the most obvious choice and in most cases the most desirable scenario. It is based on traditional data warehousing principles of extracting, transforming, and loading data, so ETL processes. And in this scenario, you define what data you want to extract, as not all data from the database is needed, and it's usually not a good idea to import all the data. Then you decide if your data needs to be transformed along the way to better suit your reporting needs. For example, do you want to perform currency conversion, or I don't know, do you need to conform city names? That being said, do you recognize this city on the screen? Yes, it's New York. Or is it NYC? Or is it New York City? So which one of these three names is correct? Yes, all of them are correct, of course. But if you import the data in your data model like this, you will get incorrect results, as each name will be treated as a separate entity. This and many more potential caveats need to be solved during the data shaping phase, and that's why is it important to spend some time massaging your data. If you don't perform data transformations on the source side, the next station is Power Query. Power Query is the built-in tool within Power BI that enables you to perform all kinds of transformations to your data. According to Microsoft's official documentation, you can apply more than 300 different transformations, and that number is constantly increasing. The key advantage of Power Query is that you can perform complex data transformations with little or no coding skills. That's the main advantage. Additionally, all steps you've applied during the data transformation process are being saved. So every time you refresh your data sets, those steps will be automatically applied to shape your data and prepare it for consuming via reports. Under the hood of Power Query is a mashup engine that enables your data shaping running smoothly. Power Query uses very powerful M language for data manipulation. And now you're probably asking yourselves what all this story about data shaping and Power Query and mashup engine, M language, etc. has to do with query folding. And I don't blame you, it's a fair question, but we will come back soon to answer it. For some data sources, such as relational databases, but also for non-relational data sources, some non-relational data sources, for example, OData, Active Directory, or Exchange, for example, Mashup engine is able to translate M language to a language that this underlying data source will understand. In most cases, it's SQL. By pushing complex calculations and transformations directly to a source, Power Query leverage capabilities of those robust relational database engines that are built to cope with large volumes of data in the most efficient way. And that ability of Power Query's mashup engine to create one single SQL statement, combining all M statements behind your transformations, is what we call query folding. Or let's make it simple. If the mashup engine is able to generate a single SQL query that is going to be executed on the data source side, we say that the query faults. As I already mentioned, the most obvious beneficiary of query faulting are relational database sources such as SQL Server, Oracle, or MySQL. However, it's not just that SQL databases can take advantage of query faulting concept. Essentially, any data source that supports some kind of querying language can possibly take advantage of query faulting. Those other data sources can be OData analysis services, SQL Server analysis services, SharePoint lists, Exchange, and Active Directory, for example. On the other hand, there are some sources that don't support query faulting at all. For example, Excel files or blob storage files or flat files in your Power BI data sets. When you use them, query can't fault. However, when it comes to data sources that support query faulting in general, like we mentioned previously, it's important to keep in mind that not all transformations can be folded and pushed to a data source. So just to be clear, a fact that SQL database supports query faulting doesn't necessarily mean that your query will fold. There are some Power Query transformations that simply can't be pushed to a SQL database engine. And very often some subtle differences in the Power Query transformations can be decisive in the final outcome and if your query will fold or not. I'll show you a few of those subtle differences later during our demo. Generally speaking, the following transformations, when applied in Power Query, can be translated to a single SQL statement. So those transformations are removing columns, renaming columns, then filtering rows with static values or Power Query parameters, as they are treated as where clause predicates in SQL, then grouping and summarizing, which have equivalent in SQL's group by clause, merging of foldable queries based on the same source. This operation translates to join in SQL. When I say merging of foldable queries, that means it will work if you are joining, for example, two SQL Server tables, but it will not work if you're trying to join SQL table and, let's say, Excel file. Also, appending foldable queries based on the same source. This transformation relates to union all operator in SQL. Adding custom columns with simple logic. What does simple logic means? That means using M functions that have equivalents in SQL language, for example, mathematical functions or text manipulation functions. And finally, pivot and unpivot transformations will also fold. On the other hand, some transformations that will prevent query from folding are merging queries based on different sources. As I explained previously, if you try to merge SQL Server table and Excel file, then appending also queries from different sources, also similar logic as in the previous case, adding custom columns that have complex logic, or using some M functions that don't have counterpart in SQL. Then adding index columns, and finally changing column data type. This last one, changing column data type, is a typical it depends case. I will show you later on what it depends, but just keep in mind that changing a column data type can be both foldable and non-foldable transformation. Okay, as we explained, what is a query folding, which data sources support it, and which transformations within the data source itself, let's examine why is it important to achieve this behavior, or maybe it's better to say, why should you care if the query folds or not? When you're using import mode in Power BI, data refresh process will work more efficient when the query folds, both in terms of refresh speed and resource consumption. If you're working with direct query or dual storage mode, as you're targeting SQL database directly, all your transformations must fold or your solution simply will not work. And finally, query folding is also of key importance for incremental refresh. And it's so important that Power BI will warn you once it determines that query folding can be achieved. It will not break your incremental refresh per se, but without query folding in place, incremental refresh wouldn't serve its main purpose to reduce the amount of data that needs to be refreshed in your data model. because without query folding, mashup engine needs to retrieve all data from the source and then apply subsequent steps to filter the data. With all this in mind, you should tend to achieve query folding whenever possible. One important disclaimer here, and I would say that this is one of key takeaways of this session. If your report is slow, or your visuals need a lot of time to render, or your data model size is large, query folding has nothing to do with it. So only if your data refresh or incremental refresh are slow and inefficient, you should investigate your Power Query steps in more depth. Also, very important consideration: all or nothing. Query folding is not all or nothing process. That means if you have, let's say, 10 transformation steps within Power Query, and your query folds until 6th step, you will still get some benefit from partial query folding. However, once the query folding is broken, it can't be achieved anymore, so there is no way back. To simplify, if you have 10 transformation steps and your query folding is broken in 5th step, all previous steps will fold, but once the folding is broken, it can't be achieved again. Even if you have transformations that support query folding by default in these subsequent steps, like in this example where I have filtered rows, so filtering should be foldable step, but in this example, it will not fold. So keep that in mind. Try to push all non-foldable steps down the pipeline as much as possible. I'll show you later one example of this scenario. Okay, so let me just take a little more water. So we are not rookies anymore. We know what is query folding, why should we strive to achieve it, and some subtle tricks that can make a huge difference. Now it's time to learn how can we check if the specific query fold or not. The first and most obvious way is to right-click on the step and check how View Native Query option looks like. So if it's grayed out, like in this illustration you see on your screens, this step probably not fold. On the other hand, if you are able to click on this option, that means that your query again probably will fold. I guess you're maybe confused with word probably, but that's the proper word, as you can't be 100% sure that if the View Native Query option is disabled, that your query doesn't fold. I will show you in a few minutes how can this option trick us to think that the query folding was broken, even though that in reality folding actually occurs. Instead, when you want to be sure if your query folds or not, you can use Query Diagnostics feature within Power Query Editor or SQL Server Profiler as a good old and reliable way to check the queries sent to your database by the Power BI engine. Additionally, there is a cool new feature in Power Query Online where each step is marked with the icon that shows if that step folds, not folds, or if it's unknown. As I said, this feature is available only in Power Query Online at this moment. So let's hope that Power BI team will implement it in desktop soon also. Fine, I've already told you that during our session you will find out why people say that the devil is in the detail, and now it's time to understand how little nuances can make a big difference in our data transformation process. So I guess we are ready to get our hands dirty and learn query folding on practical examples. First devil number one is merge join, and this one is very interesting as you will hardly assume what is happening in the background. So let me open my Power Query Editor. I'm using AdventureWorks sample database for this demo, so you can play around also if you like. And let's say that I want to combine two of my queries into one query. Okay, so my fact internet sales table, I don't need all those columns for the sake of clarity. I will leave only because I want to merge with dim customer table. I will keep customer key and let's say sales amount, just those two. And now if I right click here and select new query, combine, and go to merge queries as new, I will be prompted to enter the table, to select the tables that I want to merge. And first one is fact internet sales. and the second one is dim customer. Okay, I will choose customer key columns to perform merge operation on, as you may recall from our previous part, merge has its equivalent in join operation in SQL. So I will choose inner join here, and I will confirm that. Let's wait a few seconds until Power BI apply our transformation. Okay, so there it is, and you can see here that on the top I have the Power BI automatically applied table.nested join function. Okay, so now if I go to this source, you see that this option view native query is being grayed out. And the problem is that by default, when you are merging two queries, Power Query will generate this nested join statement, which can't be properly translated in SQL. So how can we solve this? I'll keep this here, and I will just go again, right click here and new query. This time I will choose blank query. And I will just go and rewrite this function that Power BI generated automatically. I will use table join function. So not nested join, but table join function. And then I will manually specify the tables I want to merge here. So fact internet sales. Oops. Sorry. Fact internet sales, and I want to merge on customer key. And the other one is dim customer, also customer key column. And I will specify a join kind inner. So we want to perform inner join. Now you will see that I get exactly the same results with expanded columns from customer table. And now if we click on source, I will see that view native query option is again grayed out. Okay, so we can assume that this transformation doesn't fold. But if I go here on the top in Tools tab and click on Diagnose step, so Power BI will perform some actions in the background, and you will see this folder diagnostics. I will choose this aggregated table, and I need to find data source query. That's the column which I'm interested in. So data source query. And I will go all down to the bottom and find my query that was generated and sent to underlying SQL database. And you can see here that in fact this query folded. How do I know that? You see that Power BI took this top 1000, that's sampling of the data from underlying database. Whenever you see this select top 1000, you can assume that your query folded because Power BI retrieved only first 1000 rows to sample data and perform other things that need to be done before you import data in your data model. And you see this, that here I have this inner prefix from our dim customer table, and I have outer prefix from my fact table, and you see sales amount column from my fact table. And you can see here that in fact Power Query generated single SQL statement that was executed on the SQL database side. So basically we found two devils in this example. The first one was join type that we were able to solve by writing proper M code. And the other one was the incorrect behavior of view native query option. And I'll show you later in one more example when view native query lies. Okay, so let's go back to presentation. Devil number 2 is changing data type. And this one is also quite interesting. This is one of the most common transformations in Power Query, so changing data types. And you know, it's a well-known best practice to use proper data types in your data model. For example, if you don't need hours, minutes, and seconds level of granularity in your reports, you should be better off getting rid of them and change data type of that column from date time to date only. However, you know how they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So let me show you one really subtle difference that can cause your query to become damn slow, even though you stick with with this recommendation to use proper data type. So let's go back to Power Query Editor. Let's do some cleansing before that. I will delete this one. Okay, and let's delete those two. We don't need them, I think, anymore. Okay, so I will go to my fact table, and let's say that, let's go back to original state, and let's say that I want to change order date column, which is of date time data type to date only. So I want to get rid of this time part here. So there are multiple ways to achieve this, to change data type of this column. Okay, so the first one is to right click on the column, which I did, select this change type, and instead of date time, I will choose date. Okay, and I see that here my transformation step was applied. Few important things happen here, so let me explain each of those. As I said, in the applied steps pane here, you see that we have our transformation step and it was recorded. In the column itself, you can see that the time portion disappeared. And when I go here and open View Native Query option, let me just zoom it a little bit. So you can see that Mashup Engine nicely translated our transformation to a T-SQL convert function. You see here, it converted to date and was able to basically translate our transformation to a single SQL statement. And the final thing is that the formula, the M formula applied to this transformation step is table.transform column types. Just remember that. Okay. So I will now clear this step and I will show you the other option to change type of the data column. So I will again right click on this column, and just below this change type option, you see this transform option. And here you see date only. I will click on this date only. And at first glance, everything looks the same. So we got rid of time part here. So looks quite similar. But let's again walk through all the things that happen now. So instead of the change type step, first we have extracted date step. So it's different step. The column itself, as I said, looks exactly the same as in the previous example. So no time portion here. And if I right click on this step, you see that this query doesn't fold anymore. Okay, a View Native query is grayed out. So this time, let me zoom it a little bit. This time M formula applied was table.transform columns. So one single different word in the M formula. In previous example, we had table.transform column types versus table transform columns affected our query so hard that it couldn't be translated to SQL. Take over from this story. Be careful and watch out when you are choosing options for changing data types. So you don't want to do, if you want to change data type, you will avoid this transform and use change type option instead. Okay, that was devil number 2. Devil number 3, writing native SQL queries. One of the first decisions, one of the earliest decisions you need to make when you're importing data into Power BI is, do you want to import the data from the SQL database as it is and then apply all transformations within the Power Query Editor? Or do you want to write your SQL query by hand to retrieve the data? If you choose this latter option, you should be aware that handwritten SQL query can't fold anymore. So in this scenario, you remember when I said that query folding, it's not all or nothing. But in this scenario, when you're writing native SQL, it's all or nothing. And once you decide to use a custom SQL statement to import the data, all subsequent transformation steps that you apply in Power Query Editor will not fold. Even if you're applying some basic transformations such as filtering or renaming columns, which would obviously fold in normal circumstances. So let me show you how this looks like. Again, go to Power Query Editor, and let's say that I will write a new SQL query that will go to my SQL server. Let's just grab the server name. I don't know it. Okay, here it is. Okay, so I will write a new query, SQL server. And here, I will use AdventureWorks DW 2017 database. And here under advanced options, if you click on this small arrow, you can write your own SQL statement to import data. And let's do something trivial. So I will go and select star from my dim date table. Okay, so nothing special. We just want to import all rows and columns from our dim date table. Okay, I will click OK. Wait a few seconds that Power BI import data. Okay, so here it is. And now let's say that I don't need rows from 2005 and 2006. So I want to do a filtering here on full date alternate key column. I will choose this under date time filters after and 31st of December 2006. So I want to preserve records beginning from January 1st, 2007. Okay, so I filtered my rows. And in normal situations, when you import your dim date table as it is, this transformation with filtering will be easily translated using where clause in SQL. So basically Mashup engine will translate this to where full date alternate key is greater or equal than January 1st, 2007. And it will be easily translated, as I said. Now, if we click here, you see that View Native Query option is disabled. So let's check in Query Diagnostics what happens. So I will go to Tools, Diagnose tab. Let's wait a few seconds, click on Aggregating, and let's see our queries in Data Source Query. And here you see that only one single query was fired against our underlying database, AdventureWorks database. That was the first query we wrote, select star from dim date. This filtering that happened after that was not followed. What will happen here? Power BI will import all the data from SQL Server from the dim date table, and then apply filtering within Mashup engine, which is of course much worse in terms of performance, comparing that Power BI could generate single SQL statement and push where clause to a SQL Server database. Sorry. So how do we solve this? There are two possible solutions if you decide to go this way and write your SQL code by hand. First one is creating a database view. This is the most desirable scenario. If you have enough permissions, if you're able to create views in the underlying database, you can go and encapsulate your whole transformation logic within the view, and then you can import this view as it is with all applied transformations already in place. As database views are being treated exactly the same as database tables in Power BI, that means you can still achieve query folding on the view. If you don't have necessary permissions to create database objects, you can apply all necessary transformations within a single SQL statement. So the other option, as I said, is to include all necessary transformation steps within this one single SQL statement that you write in our example. So I will go to this query which we wrote, and I will change this in source. And let's say that I want to keep, as in previous case, I want to keep only those rows after January 1st, 2007. So I will write where clause, where full date alternate key is greater or equal than 2007 January 1st. And if I now click OK, you will see that, oops, something. Full date alternate key. Syntax error. So if I now run this query, you can see that this query folded. You don't see it here because we wrote native SQL query, but if we go to Diagnose step, Let's wait a few seconds. And if I open now my data source query, you can see that now our filtering was performed on the database source side. There are some improvements. I want to mention this. There are some improvements recently to query folding when you write native SQL queries. Chris Webb wrote an excellent blog post about using value.native query function and providing explicit value true for the enable folding argument. However, as far as I checked and as far as I tested, at this moment, this option works only for PostgreSQL connector, which is documented in Microsoft's official documentation. It can work in SQL Server too, but not out of the box, not in the most intuitive way, as you would need to manually replace the M code within Advanced Editor. So this is still more of a workaround solution. Of course, helpful indeed, but let's hope that in the near future we get an out-of-the-box possibility to explicitly instruct Power BI that we want to enable query folding when we write custom T-SQL. Okay, so I promised in the previous part that I will show you one more example when the view native query option can fool you to think that the query folding was broken, even if in reality it's not true. So let's go to Power Query Editor and I will show you how. Let's first make some cleaning here. Okay, this one we also don't need. Okay, so let's say that I want to keep only top 2000 rows from my table. And in my case, I will go to my fact internet sales table and let's go, and for the sake of clarity that I can easier show you what's happening, I will just keep here product key and order date key and sales amount, and let's say order date, for example. Okay, and now I want to keep only top 2000 rows. So I will click here. Let me show you once again. Maybe I was too fast. So here you have this keep rows option. I will click on keep top rows, and then I will select top 2000 rows. Okay, so now you see that Power Query applied this transformation, and if I right click on this step, I will see that in view native query it was translated to a single SQL statement, taking advantage of top clause in T-SQL. Okay, so far so good. Sorry. Okay, and now let's say that I want to apply absolute value transformation on my sales amount column. Normally this transformation easily folds, as you probably know, there is an ABS function in T-SQL, absolute function. So I will go to sales amount, right click on it, and under transform, I will choose absolute value. Okay. If I right click on this step, you see that my view native query option is grayed out. So I can assume that my query folding was broken. Okay, but let's go to tools and diagnose this step. Okay, waiting a few seconds. Here it is, and let's go to grab our queries from data source query. And here, let me zoom it a little bit. You can see that this view native query is a lying bastard. So he tricked us to think that our query folding was broken, even if it in the end it folded. You see that single SQL statement, you see usage of ABS function in T-SQL, and you see here, of course, nested query. So we were able basically to push all the calculations here on the source side, and this query in the end folded. So the key takeaway here from this example is whenever you're assuming that specific transformation can be folded, like in this example, when we simply knew that SQL has ABS function to support our transformation, double check what really happens under the hood. Okay. If I didn't manage to convince you so far, why should you give your best to achieve query folding? Let me now pull my last ace up the sleeve. And I want to show you the difference in data refresh performance between the queries that return exactly the same results. One of them is folding, the other not. So I will use another Power BI PBIX file because this is it has more records, so it's easier to spot the difference between performance of these two concepts. Okay, so as you see, I'm using Contoso database. It's also free sample database. You can go and download it from web and play around with it if you like, of course. I have only one table here, fact online sales, and I created just one simple measure which count rows in my fact table. And you can see that I have 12.6 million records in my fact table. Okay, so I'll go now and apply some transformation steps. So we'll go to transform data. Okay, so we just importing table as it is, and let's go and perform some transformation steps. So I will go first, and let's say I want to expand dim customer. I will choose first name, last name, and gender. Okay, you see that all steps are being recorded here on the right hand side. Then let's go and transform our first name column and make it uppercase. I'll probably do some, nonsense transformations here, but I just want to show you in the end how query folding works and why is it important to keep it here. So I uppercase first name, and let's go now and, for example, find our date key. Okay, and let's say that I want to change this to, instead of date time, I want only dates. So I will go to change type, and instead of date time, I will choose date. Okay, now I will go and let's say that I need to grab some data about my products. I will expand dim product table, and let's choose, I don't know, product name. Okay, now let's say that we want to apply again absolute value on our sales amount here. So right click on it, transform, and absolute value. Then let's say I want to do some filtering. Let me find, let's say total cost, and I want to filter to keep only those rows where the total cost is, let's say, greater than 5. Okay. Now let's remove some columns. For example, this ATL load ID, I will remove this column. Then let's do some replacing values. So let's say that for gender, for example, I want to replace values, and I want to have, I don't know, male instead of M. Okay. And finally, let's say that I want to keep only those rows with sales amount. Let's filter on sales amount. Here I will filter only those rows that are greater than, that have sales amount greater than 300. Okay. Now if I right click on this last step, you can see that view native query option is enabled. And let me maximize this window, and you can see that this really looks ugly. This SQL looks ugly, and don't expect that Power Query will generate the most efficient SQL. So it will generate correct SQL. So you will get correct results. But if you're a seasoned SQL developer, you will probably find those SQL queries a little bit, strange, and maybe this can be written in more optimal way. But for our example, it's important that Mashup Engine was able to translate all of our transformation steps to one single SQL statement. So you see this where clause where we're filtering sales amount greater than 300. You can see that it did joins on dim product and dim customer to include additional columns from those tables. You can see here, for example, absolute value. You can see using of replace this SQL function. So everything is correct here. And if we go here, if we go now back and hit close and apply, let's just measure this. I'll check how long it will take. So you see that the batches of imported data are around 50,000 or 60,000 to almost 100,000 per batch. So you can follow, and you can quickly assume by just by looking at these batches if your query faults or not. If it doesn't fault, you will see in next example, those batches are much smaller. So it's 10,000 or maybe 15,000. And let's wait a few more seconds or a few more minutes, but hopefully seconds. Okay, so that's it. Basically, it took around 40 seconds here, and you see that we have in the end 2.8 million rows. So that was the case when query folded. Let me show you now what happens when query folding is broken somewhere in the middle. Okay, so I have all this. I will keep all those exactly the same steps. Just under change type, I will intentionally break my query folding using those transformations. So here I will delete this one, and after uppercase text, let's go to date key, and instead of change type, I will use transform and date only. Okay. Yes, I want to insert step. So we extracted our date. And now if we go and let's wait a few seconds for Power BI to apply those changes. If we go here, you can see that this view native query option now is grayed out. Okay, so our query doesn't fold anymore. And we still wait. So you can now already assume that something is inefficient, probably. Let's go and hit close and apply, and let's now wait for Power BI to apply those changes. Okay, so I will again turn on my stopwatch, and first we need to wait for evaluating. And once it starts to load the data, you will see the difference in batches, but also one even more important difference, which I will explain you when it happens. This will take a few minutes, so if someone has a question or whatever related to a previous part of the session, just feel free to drop a question, because we will have a few minutes and I'll until this completes.
Nikola, hi, this is Kirill.
Hi, Kirill.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm fine. You?
I'm doing well. So I noticed sometimes the developers would put like a execute stored procedure in that native query window of the Power Query. And I was reading that it does not fold, but doesn't it like actually prescribe exactly what to run on the back end?
It will not fold. So if you need to use store procedure for any single reason, I also used it a few times, then just be sure to put all your transformations within store procedure logic. Because if you're using store procedure and you forgot to do something and you want to apply transformation in Power Query, it will not fold. Whatever you try to do after using store procedure, it will not fold. So only tables, views, and table valued functions can fold in Power Query.
Right.
Only
so if you just execute a stored procedure and all of the logic is in stored procedure on the back end, then that's okay.
That's also fine. Yeah. Okay, it's just important not to do anything after that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we are still waiting. This one will take. When I was testing, this was like 7-8 minutes. So if there are some more questions, I will go through the chat to check if someone asks. SAP HANA 10, Sandra Tenwalde asked folding related to SAP HANA. Honestly, I never used it, so I'm afraid I'm not competent to talk about it. Okay, Kirill asked already. I saw this. Yeah, basically what's important to keep in mind that things are changing, things are improving. So Power BI team and Power Query team really works hard, and I know for some transformations that haven't folded previously. For example, I know that merging columns, for example, if you wanted to merge two columns, let's say first and last name, 6 months ago it was the step that would break the query folding. Now it folds. So they are improving constantly, and maybe in few months the things I show you here will not be actual anymore.
Just one question, Nikola, from my side.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned some things, sometimes query folding window is faking results, so it's folding but it's not visible. Is there anywhere a known list of situations when does those things happen? Or
no, I think I think it depends. It typically depends, yeah. But for example, for these apps, it's harder for people who don't have SQL background to intuitively assume what kind of functions exist in SQL. So absolute value definitely exists. So that should fold in 100% of cases. And yeah, that was the obvious one. I don't know what happened here, why it's so slow. Let me go again to transform data. Sorry about that. But that happens when you're doing live demos. Okay, so extract date. Never mind, we have time, so I will put it, and basically at one point, yeah, it will complete. So the difference I tested in few different cases. For example, on this data set of 12 million rows, which is not so big, the difference was something between 50 seconds for the query that folded and 7 minutes and something for the query that didn't fold. In the end, you get exactly the same results, but with query folding, I want to show you here, so I'll not talk in advance. If someone also has some question, yeah, just feel free. Okay, so I think it will start now. Sometimes Power BI is also tired. Especially when query doesn't fold.
Especially when it's demo time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was testing, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. It was, yeah, pretty fast, but who knows what happened now.
By the way, how do you pronounce your name correctly? Where do you put the stress? I always get confused.
Nikola.
So the last vowel or second vowel or the first one?
I would say first one.
Oh, Nikola. Okay, Nikola.
Yeah,
okay, got it.
yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. I think Italians has on last one, Nikola. Or that's the second one. I'm not good with that. Oh, come on, Power BI, don't do this. Let me go and maybe start from the scratch. Maybe it will work. I don't know why. Okay, so I will delete all the steps. Okay, so until now we have uppercase text, and now let's go and transform to date only. And what was the next one? I think expanding dim product. So I want to achieve exactly the same result. So product name, I think we grabbed this. Then, okay, so let's wait. For extracted date, it really takes some time. really apologize for this, but you can't predict those things that will happen in the middle of demo.
It's still a good example.
Yeah. You saw when query folded, you saw how fast everything was. This should be, honestly, this should be faster, but yeah, I don't know what's happening now. Why is this so slow?
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
it's happening all the time on a few sessions here on a user group. I watched the sessions a few days before, and during the live session, it always breaks something.
Yeah, the good thing for Power BI Summit was that sessions needed to be pre-recorded.
Okay.
So I could, yeah, just discard those waiting time here. Okay, expand the dim product. Then I think let's wait, and don't confuse it. So sales amount absolute value here. Transform absolute value. Okay, the next one was filtering total costs. Total cost filter greater than 5, I think. Yeah, you see how slow is this. Don't leave, people, don't leave. We'll be soon.
We have more people joining in now. Maybe they heard you have some problems with the demo.
Yeah, maybe they can. Yeah, it's so slow.
What time is it there in Stuttgart, guys?
It's 6:30. So for me and Nikola, pretty much the same time. He's in Salzburg. I'm in Stuttgart. 6:30 p.m.
Okay,
And
I'm on the West Coast, U.S., so it's 9:30 a.m. here.
Oh, good morning.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it's so slow, utterly slow. I don't know what to do. This is not going to work. Maybe if I kill it and start from scratch, I don't know, maybe it will work faster. Because this one frozen, completely frozen. Let me do this. Sorry guys, again. So I'll kill this. Yeah, I know that something went wrong. Thank you. Okay, let me open it and start from scratch. Any questions in the meantime, feel free. And again, apologize. Okay, let's go to transform data. Okay, and let's now apply those steps. So the first one was expanding dim customer. Dim customer, let's keep first name and last name and gender. Okay, then we did, let me just check, uppercasing of first name column. So transform, uppercase. Then we change the date. Transform, date only. Okay, let's wait a few seconds. Then let's expand dim product. Product name. And let's then, you know what, I think this expansion maybe kill him. Let's remove this step. Let's go and remove this step. In the end, should be the same number of rows, just to show you. Never mind. So go to sales amount, absolute value of our sales amount. So transform absolute value. Then we filtered total cost. Total cost is greater than 5. Okay, then what we did, we remove ETL load ID column. Remove. Then we replaced M with male. Gender. Replace values. So we replaced mem with male. Okay. And finally, sales amount greater than 300, I think was the last one. Sales amount is here. So it's greater than 300. Okay, and so let me check once again. Now this query doesn't fold. Okay, that's how it should be. So I will hit close and apply, and let's pray that it will work now in some considerable time. Oh yeah. Okay, so you can see that batches are now 20,000, 30,000 maximum. So you can assume that something is different than in our previous case when batches was around 100,000. And just if you recall from the previous example, when query folded, this counter went to 2.8 million rows, and it imported 2.8 million rows in our data model. Just look what will happen now when we reach 2.8 millions. So we are closing to this number, and so what happened? It didn't stop at 2.8 millions. It continued to load data basically to Mashup engine. So the Mashup engine loads data, still loading data from database, and it will take a while. As you saw, we have 12.6 million rows. Maybe we achieve some partial query folding with those first few steps, but you see now that how much time it takes comparing to a previous one. And in the end, we should see that total records number is exactly the same, 2.8 millions, but yeah, basically the problem is that because the query folding was broken, Mashup engine needed to load all data and then, filtering and doing uppercase or whatever we applied. So let's wait a few more minutes. Thank you for your patience, and once again, apologize. But that's Murphy's law. When you test at home and prepare, everything works, and then in the live session it breaks.
So just a question. So when every time when we don't have a query folding, Mashup engine will load everything and then do the steps after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think maybe one minute more and something like that. Maybe we have around 11 million rows, or because as I said, this partial query folding will help. What would help in this specific case is that if we know that this step with the transforming date will break the query folding, push it all down as the last step, and in that way, you see 11 million rows. that's the number of rows that Power Query will load, and then consequently apply all those transformation steps that we set in our Power Query. So it needed to load 5 times more records, not 5 times, but 4 times more records than in our previous case. And you see that total records are exactly the same. So basically the difference is huge here, and that's why is it important to try to achieve query folding whenever possible. Okay, so as I said, what's the most concerning here is that almost 11 million records needed to be loaded here, and this was just a basic example with one single table and not so big in terms of data volume. You can just simply imagine the magnitude of implications on some larger data set and with multiple tables in it. Okay, so basically that was regarding demos. Enough demos. Okay, so I guess we covered a lot in previous 1 hour or something like that. We explained what is data shaping and why it is important to understand this concept. Then we briefly introduced Power Query, and after that we learned what is a query folding and why should we do our best to achieve it. I've also shown you some basic examples and neat tricks on how to achieve query folding in some common use cases. And now if you feel overwhelmed with the amount of information, or even better if you absorbed everything and now you are curious to expand on these skills you gained today, here is the short list of resources to help you stay on track. The first and most interesting one is a 30 days of query folding challenge from Alex Powers from Microsoft. Strongly recommended. It's free. You can find it on YouTube. It's 30 different tasks to solve and to find out why the query folding is broken or not. Then you can also refer to Chris Webb's blog to find more tips on this topic, on Power Query topic generally. And of course, Microsoft official documentation is also a good starting point, especially as I said that they're constantly changing things, improving things. So you should definitely refer to their official documentation to see what is currently supported and what is not supported. That was it from my side. Once again, Agustin, thank you for giving me opportunity to present for Power Platform Stuttgart user group. Sorry about these problems with this demo, and yeah, so if you have any other questions, feel free. If you remember something after the session, feel free to write on Twitter, and yeah.
Thank you, Nikola. The session was really great and interesting, so don't mind little hiccups with the Power BI. We all experienced it a lot of times. So from all of us, thank you. And also just a reminder, the session was recorded and will be later shared on. So for anybody who didn't or want to share it or watch it again, will be accessible. I'll post a link on our meetup group. And yeah, well, thanks again for keeping the time for us and sharing.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Session.
It was a pleasure, really.
Thank you all for joining, and hope to see you again on the next sessions coming up in the next few weeks. Thank you. Thanks, Nikola.
Thank you. Thank you, Agustin. Thank you all. Thank you.